Louisiana is a state defined by water. From its vast bayous and murky swamps to its serene freshwater lakes and slow-moving rivers, water weaves through the heart of daily life here. At first glance, one lake in particular doesn't seem especially remarkable until you notice the chimney sticking out of it. Yes, an actual chimney, protruding from the surface like a surreal monument. But that's just the beginning. This lake, known as Lake Peigneur, once had a modest depth of just 10 feet, shallow enough for swimming, boating, and even holiday celebrations. But in November 1980, something extraordinary happened. In just a matter of hours, its depth skyrocketed from 10 feet to over 1,300 feet, making it the deepest lake in the state. It transformed from a tranquil freshwater lake into a deep, swirling saltwater vortex. And the transformation wasn't slow or natural. It was sudden, violent, and terrifying. What unfolded was one of the most bizarre and catastrophic man-made disasters in U.S. history. A surreal chain reaction triggered by a single human mistake. Lake Peigneur was, for decades, like any other peaceful body of water. Families visited it to relax, fish, and swim. Locals celebrated weddings by its shores. It was a backdrop for joy and leisure, a classic southern retreat. But beneath the surface of this quiet lake lay something few people thought much about: a massive salt dome. These geological formations are huge columns of salt that formed nearly 200 million years ago during the Jurassic Period, when the Gulf of Mexico was still a shallow salty sea. Over time, as layers of sediment covered these ancient salt deposits, they began to push upward through the earth, forming domes, and sometimes actual surface land masses. In Louisiana, there are at least 128 known salt domes. One of them, Jefferson Island, sat directly next to Lake Peigneur. And while the surface of the lake was a place of recreation, underneath it was a complex salt mine in operation since 1919. By 1980, this mine had become a sprawling underground network with massive tunnels stretching beneath the lakebed. At the same time, above ground, energy companies were busy drilling for oil, and that's where things went disastrously wrong. On the morning of November 20th, 1980, workers from Texaco set up a floating drilling platform on Lake Peigneur. They were on a mission to explore the Jefferson Island salt dome for oil reserves, a routine task in a region that had been pumping oil since the early 1900s. Everything seemed normal at first. The crew lowered the drill and began working toward a depth of 1,227 feet. But suddenly, the drill bit got stuck. That wasn't unusual in itself. Drill bits get stuck all the time. But this time, they couldn't free it. Then they heard it. A series of eerie, popping sounds rising from below. Before anyone could figure out what was happening, the lake's surface began to swirl. Then the rig vanished. It didn't tip. It didn't sink. It simply disappeared into the lake, as if yanked down by some unseen force. What followed was a terrifying chain reaction. The swirling water picked up speed, turning into a vortex nearly 3 miles wide. It devoured 11 barges, a tugboat, acres of trees, entire chunks of shoreline, and even Jefferson Island itself. Beneath the surface, 55 miners were working in the salt mine, completely unaware that the lake above them had just begun to pour through a hole drilled straight into their workplace. Astonishingly, all of them escaped. That miracle can be credited to a sharp-eyed electrician who noticed warning signs early and raised the alarm. Despite the rising panic, the miners evacuated in time, some from as deep as 1,500 feet below ground. Not a single life was lost. As the lake drained into the massive salt caverns, the sudden vacuum triggered a reverse flow in the Delcambre Canal, which normally carried water out to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, salt water rushed backward into Lake Peigneur to fill the void. This reversal caused a once-in-a-lifetime sight in Louisiana, a 164-foot waterfall, the tallest in the state's history, cascading inward into the lake's new abyss. Then came the geysers. Compressed air trapped within the mine's collapsing chambers blasted upward through the ground, launching columns of water and air over 300 feet into the sky. To eyewitnesses, it looked like the world was ending. So what exactly caused this jaw-dropping event? Simply put, Texaco drilled into the salt mine by accident. The drill punctured one of the mine's large caverns, and the lake water began pouring in. Salt, being highly soluble, dissolved rapidly. The structural pillars holding the mine together began to collapse, and the small hole turned into an unstoppable sinkhole. This disaster unfolded over just a few hours, but the consequences were immense. Following the incident, multiple investigations were launched, but no official report ever fully placed blame. Texaco claimed they were misled by inaccurate maps of the salt mine. Diamond Crystal Salt, which operated the mine, accused Texaco and their subcontractors of drilling in the wrong spot. Meanwhile, nearby Live Oak Gardens sued both companies. Over 64 acres of their lush botanical gardens were swallowed by the lake. Eventually, all lawsuits were settled out of court, Texaco paid around $45 million in total, including $32 million to Diamond Crystal Salt for damages, $12.8 million to Live Oak Gardens. But no one was ever officially held responsible. Though the lake had undergone a violent transformation, nature didn't abandon it. Instead, it adapted. Lake Peigneur, once a shallow freshwater ecosystem, was now saltwater and far deeper. This meant freshwater fish and plants were gone, but in their place came marine species, including salt-tolerant fish and aquatic vegetation. The environment rebooted. Over time, tourists, scientists, and curious travelers began visiting the site, drawn by both its ecological uniqueness and its eerie history. Even more surprising, 9 of the 11 barges that had been swallowed eventually floated back to the surface, including the now iconic chimney that had been part of a sunken house. In 1994, over a decade after the disaster, a new use was found for the salt dome under Lake Peigneur. AGL Resources began using the vast caverns to store compressed natural gas. It was actually a smart idea. Salt formations are impermeable, which makes them ideal for safely storing gas and oil. These natural vaults don't leak, and they can hold gas for long periods without degradation. Plus, the gas can be pumped in, extracted, and cycled repeatedly. But residents weren't all thrilled. By 2009, many people who lived near the lake still remembered the disaster vividly. The idea of storing flammable gas beneath the same lake that once swallowed everything terrified them. The fear was simple. What if it happened again? A single error, a misplaced drill, a misread map, a structural flaw, could trigger another catastrophe. The trauma of the 1980 disaster had not faded, and many felt the risk was being ignored in the name of profit. Here's something to think about. What happened at Lake Peigneur wasn't just a bizarre fluke. In fact, salt domes are now used across the U.S. to store crucial energy reserves, including oil. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency stockpile for national energy security, is stored underground in salt caverns, just like the one beneath Lake Peigneur. 2 of these massive reserves, West Hackberry and Bayou Choctaw, are also located in Louisiana. West Hackberry alone can hold over 9.5 billion gallons of oil. If something were to go wrong at one of those facilities, the consequences would be far more serious, not just locally, but nationally. The story of Lake Peigneur is a chilling reminder of how one small human error can unleash unimaginable destruction, not from nature's fury, but from our own ignorance. Yet it also shows how resilient nature can be. In just a few hours, a peaceful lake was transformed. An entire landscape was swallowed. Yet today, life thrives there once again. The lake has found a strange new equilibrium, deeper, salter, and forever changed. Visitors still come to see the lake, where the earth opened up. Some look for answers. Others just want to witness the site of one of the most unbelievable engineering accidents in U.S. history. And floating quietly near the surface, that chimney still stands, a solemn reminder of how close we can come to disaster when we forget to look below the surface. In April 2017, the quiet town of Firestone, Colorado, was rocked by an event that would leave a lasting scar on the community. It happened in an instant, unexpected, violent, and tragic. A house on Twilight Avenue suddenly exploded, reducing the structure to rubble and killing 2 men inside. 2 others were injured but survived the blast. The neighboring home suffered significant damage, with its attic partially destroyed. The cause? A routine task gone horribly wrong. The men were installing a water heater in the basement when a massive explosion occurred. Investigators later discovered the basement was filled with natural gas. A single spark was all it took. The gas ignited, triggering a devastating fireball that obliterated the home. 10 days after the explosion, Anadarko Petroleum Corporation, owner of a nearby gas well, announced it would temporarily shut down over 3,000 vertical wells in northeastern Colorado. That's right, 3,000 wells. And that's just in one part of the state. You might be wondering, how many abandoned wells are there across the country? Thousands. Try millions. And these forgotten, decaying wells don't just sit quietly underground. They leak. They pollute. And in some tragic cases, like Firestone, they explode. Before I came across this story, I had no idea the problem was this big. Honestly, it's enough to make anyone stop and rethink what's beneath their feet. Abandoned oil and gas wells are an invisible threat across much of the United States and around the world. The real danger lies not just in their existence, but in their sheer number and the lack of oversight. To uncover just how widespread the issue is, ABC News launched an investigation. Their team spent weeks researching, interviewing experts, and deploying specialized gas detectors to suspected abandoned well sites. They inspected 76 wells spread across 5 states. Of those, 40 were leaking. Some leaked oil. Most leaked natural gas. Leaks were found on Kansas farmland, next to creeks in upstate New York, near schools in Colorado, and even along hiking trails outside Los Angeles. They didn't stop there. The team took their investigation offshore to the Gulf of Mexico, home to more than 14,000 abandoned oil and gas wells beneath the sea. Of the 10 offshore wells they tested, 7 were leaking gas. That's a 70% leak rate. These findings barely scratch the surface. It's estimated that over 3.5 million oil and gas wells in the U.S. are abandoned or inactive, and 14 million Americans live within just 1.5 miles of one. Some states have a few hundred. Others, like Pennsylvania, have hundreds of thousands. In fact, Pennsylvania alone is believed to have more than 330,000 abandoned wells, many dating back to the early days of oil drilling in the 19th century. Yet despite the risks, only a small percentage of these wells are monitored or maintained. And finding them, that's another challenge entirely. One of the most serious obstacles in addressing the abandoned well crisis is the lack of reliable data. Many of these wells are so old, they've vanished from records. Some were drilled before documentation was even required. Others have missing or incomplete information. In many cases, no one knows who owns the well, where exactly it's located, or even if it's been properly sealed. Some wells have been left uncapped for over a century, and without accurate records, it's nearly impossible to identify which ones pose the most immediate danger. Texas, for example, is home to over 600,000 wells, more than any other state. Many are concentrated in the oil-rich Permian Basin. Of those, more than 8,500 are classified as orphaned, meaning the company that drilled them no longer exists or has abandoned responsibility. And it's not just a problem in the U.S. Canada has also documented thousands of leaking or abandoned wells, thanks to public data and stricter regulations. But in other top oil-producing nations like Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, little is known. A 2020 Royal Society study couldn't find credible estimates for abandoned wells in those countries. Globally, experts estimate there are around 29 million abandoned oil and gas wells, and most of them are unsealed. In most cases, these wells leak methane, a colorless, odorless, highly flammable gas that is also one of the most potent greenhouse gases known to science. But it doesn't end there. Some wells also emit benzene, a known carcinogen, or hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas that can be fatal in even small concentrations. Methane poses a dual threat. In confined spaces like basements, it can displace oxygen and lead to suffocation. It can also accumulate until it reaches explosive levels, just as it did in Firestone. There, investigators discovered that a damaged, unsealed gas pipeline connected to an old well had been leaking odorless gas into the home's basement. Even worse, they later found an even bigger pocket of methane beneath an adjacent empty lot. Fortunately, it didn't ignite. So why not collect and use the gas? In theory, it's possible. Methane is the same gas used for heating homes and powering stoves. But the quantities leaking from most abandoned wells are too small to be commercially viable. The cost of installing recovery equipment far exceeds the value of the gas collected. You might think this is just a rural problem, but abandoned wells are often hiding in plain sight, even in major U.S. cities. Take Los Angeles, for instance. It sits atop one of the most historic oil fields in the country. As a result, the city has thousands of buried wells, many of which have long been forgotten. In the working-class neighborhood of Vista Hermosa, methane vent pipes, they look like ordinary fence posts, but they're actually safety features, releasing built-up gas from over a dozen wells buried beneath the turf. At least 3 of those wells remain unplugged. Local activists have urged the city to plug more than 800 abandoned wells under residential neighborhoods. Some residents suspect a connection between the wells and unusually high illness rates in the area. Even when wells don't explode, they quietly pollute the air, contaminate groundwater, and release harmful chemicals. In West Texas, locals call them zombie wells, long-dead drilling sites that have come back to haunt communities by leaking toxic and carcinogenic substances into the environment. We often talk about carbon dioxide when discussing climate change, but methane is far more potent in the short term, over 80 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat over a 20-year period. In 2018 alone, abandoned and orphaned wells in the U.S. released an estimated 281,000 tons of methane into the atmosphere. That's equivalent to the climate impact of burning about 16 million barrels of crude oil, roughly what the U.S. consumes in a single day. Researchers estimate that plugging all abandoned wells would prevent the release of 7 to 20 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. That's like taking 1.5 to 4.3 million cars off the road annually. One of the most notorious examples of an unsealed well gone wrong is Lake Peigneur in Texas. What looks like a turquoise desert oasis is actually a toxic lake, formed by an abandoned well drilled in the 1950s. The well now gushes over 500 gallons of water per minute, water contaminated with arsenic, benzene, hydrogen sulfide, and sometimes even radioactive materials. The surrounding area reeks of sulfur. Bird bones litter the shoreline. Nothing survives long in or around the water, and no one wants to take responsibility. The Texas Railroad Commission insists the local water district is responsible for sealing the well. The water district argues that only the state has the legal authority and funding to do so. Meanwhile, the toxic water continues to flow, threatening to contaminate the surrounding aquifers. Today, oil and gas companies are required by law to seal inactive wells, but that wasn't always the case. For decades, many wells were simply abandoned once they stopped producing oil or gas. Even now, enforcement is weak. Some companies go bankrupt before they're forced to plug their wells. Others ignore their obligations entirely. The result? Millions of open holes that continue leaking harmful substances. Properly sealing a well isn't as simple as placing a cap on top. The well must be cleaned, its pipes removed, and then sealed with cement in layers deep underground. The final plug is welded shut and buried, restoring the land's natural shape. Costs vary. A shallow land well might cost a few $1,000s to seal. Offshore wells, especially in deep water, can cost millions. The total cost of plugging all abandoned wells in the U.S. could exceed $250 billion. Currently, government funding will cover only about 6% of those wells. Before drilling, companies must post a bond, a kind of insurance in case they fail to clean up. But the bond amounts are often too low to cover actual sealing costs. Efforts to raise bonding requirements have met fierce resistance from the oil and gas industry, which warns it could bankrupt smaller companies. So the burden falls on taxpayers. In the end, you and I pay for the mess left behind. The abandoned well crisis is massive, dangerous, and growing. It's a silent hazard buried beneath homes, farms, schools, parks, and oceans. If left unaddressed, these forgotten wells will continue leaking pollution, spreading disease, and fueling climate change, often out of sight, but never out of reach. Look closely at this small town, Maxwell, California. With a population of just around 1,000 people, it's a quiet, unassuming place nestled in the northern part of the state. There's not much that makes it stand out, except for one thing. Soon, nearly 475 billion gallons of water will be stored in a nearby valley, thanks to a new infrastructure project with a jaw-dropping price tag of $4 billion. At first glance, that might sound contradictory. California is notorious for its water shortages. In many parts of the state, residents are used to saving water year after year, cutting back on everything from showers to lawn irrigation. Farmers, who make up a large share of the state's water consumers, are under constant pressure to conserve every drop for their crops. With such a strong emphasis on conservation and such tight regulations on water usage, how does building a massive new reservoir, one that releases a huge volume of water into a drought-prone region? Surprisingly, this is California's strategy to fight back against its increasingly unpredictable water future. Let's dig into the problem first. California's geography is a major challenge when it comes to water availability. Large portions of the state are made up of deserts. Take the Mojave Desert, for example. It covers more than 13,000 square miles, but receives only 2 to 6 inches of rain per year. With temperatures regularly soaring over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, most of that rain evaporates before it can be of any use. Then there's the Colorado Desert, covering another 10,800 square miles, where similar conditions prevail: hot, dry, and unforgiving. And don't forget about the sprawling Great Basin Desert, which extends into eastern California. It receives just 6 to 12 inches of rain annually, making the landscape inhospitable to large-scale water storage without major engineering. California's natural environment simply doesn't support stable, abundant water supplies. But the situation gets even worse when you factor in the drought cycles. In July 2021, for example, Governor Gavin Newsom urged residents to reduce water usage by 15%. That wasn't new. In 2015, amid another severe drought, then Governor Jerry Brown mandated a 25% reduction in urban water use. Why such drastic measures? Just take a look at this data. Between 2014 and 2017, about 60% of California was experiencing what experts called exceptional drought. And nearly the entire state faced drought conditions of some level. After a short recovery, yet another drought hit in 2020, stretching well into 2023. It's a vicious cycle. And while these events vary in intensity, one thing is consistent. California regularly runs dangerously low on water. That's why restrictions are essential to prevent total water collapse during dry years. Oddly enough, while the state was dealing with drought, some regions were hit by severe floods. During these rare but intense storms, hundreds of millions of gallons of rainwater fell in just days. Too much, too fast. The flooding damaged homes, infrastructure, and in some cases took lives. That's the paradox of California. Not enough water when you need it, and too much when you don't. Naturally, This contradiction sparked a big idea. What if California could capture floodwaters and store them for future use? This idea dates back to the 1950s and 60s, when the state first launched the California State Water Project, SWP. It led to the construction of one of the world's largest water infrastructure systems. Key components of the SWP include the San Luis Dam, which created the San Luis Reservoir, capable of storing 792 billion gallons. Another is Lake Oroville, formed by damming the Feather River, with a capacity of 1.1 trillion gallons. Water from these reservoirs is transported through a vast network of pipelines and canals. The centerpiece of this system is the California Aqueduct, a 460-mile water highway that moves water across regions, capable of carrying 98,000 gallons per second. At the southern end of the aqueduct lies the Edmundston Pumping Plant, one of the most powerful water lifting stations on Earth. To give you an idea of its might, it can lift water nearly 2,000 feet, higher than the Eiffel Tower. The SWP is a marvel of engineering, and it served California well for decades. But over the years, demand has outgrown supply. The state's population has more than doubled. Agricultural and industrial needs have ballooned. Meanwhile, climate change has made rainfall patterns even less predictable. That's why the state is building something new, the Sites Reservoir, just west of Maxwell. Why here? The location is ideal. The valley is shaped like a natural basin, surrounded by hills and mountains, minimizing the need for artificial barriers. It's lightly populated, which avoids the social disruptions that dams often cause. And with sparse vegetation, environmental impact is lower. Planning for the reservoir started in 1996. Over the next 18 years, more than $50 million was spent on feasibility studies. The project will require 12 dams, 3 large ones and 9 smaller ones, to contain the water. The tallest of these, the Golden Gate Dam, will rise 285 feet. Not quite a record breaker, but still impressive. For comparison, Lake Oroville's dam stands at 770 feet, making it the tallest in the U.S. The site's reservoir will be enormous. It will stretch 13 miles from north to south and 4 miles across, with a maximum depth of 262 feet. When full, it will store up to 475 billion gallons, ranking it among California's largest reservoirs. But what makes Sites truly unique is its off-stream design. Unlike traditional dams, it won't block a river. Instead, it will divert water from the Sacramento River, but only during times of high flow, and only after environmental and legal obligations are satisfied. During droughts, water from Sites can be released back into the system, providing a much-needed buffer against shortages. According to officials, the stored volume is enough to supply 7.5 million people for an entire year. The water will be moved through existing infrastructure, pumping stations, pipelines, and canals, reducing the need for new construction and minimizing environmental disruption. And there's another advantage. A large portion of the reservoir's water will be reserved for environmental purposes. California's ecosystems have suffered during past droughts. Sites is designed to stabilize river flows, improve wetland conditions, and even help endangered fish species, including the Sacramento salmon. Because the reservoir won't sit on the river itself, salmon migration routes remain unobstructed. That's a major win for conservationists. Sites may also work in conjunction with Shasta Lake to deliver cold water, essential for salmon spawning. Still, it's not all good news. Some environmental groups remain opposed. While Sites won't directly dam a river, it will draw water from the Sacramento, and during peak diversion, it could take up to 60% of the river's flow. Critics worry this could endanger not just salmon, but 23 other vulnerable species. Evaporation is another concern. With California's high temperatures, it's estimated that 9.7 billion gallons of water will evaporate from Sites each year, water that will need to be replaced. There's also the issue of emissions. In 2023, the group Friends of the River, backed by the Tell the Damn Truth campaign and funded by outdoor clothing brand Patagonia, released a report stating that the Sites project could emit around 362,000 metric tons of CO2 annually during operation. Much of that comes from methane, released as submerged vegetation breaks down. Despite these concerns, many believe the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. The Sites reservoir is scheduled for construction between 2026 and 2032, and it's a key part of California's water strategy. But it won't be enough on its own. That's why California is also turning to wastewater reuse. As of 2025, the state treats over 224 billion gallons of wastewater each year. Most of this is used in agriculture, which consumes about 80% of California's developed water supply. Reusing water here frees up more clean water for households and industry. The state is also investing in groundwater recharge, injecting treated water into aquifers for future use. In Orange County, one facility alone recharges 98 million gallons per day. Industries are also embracing recycled water for cooling systems, concrete mixing, and even paper production. Why? It's cheaper than raw fresh water and doesn't require extreme purification. So maybe, in the not-so-distant future, California will finally break its cycle of drought and desperation, not by changing the climate, but by changing the way it stores, uses, and values water. This is the Great Man-Made River, a colossal engineering feat buried beneath the sands of Libya. Dubbed the world's largest irrigation project, the Libyan government even went as far as calling it the eighth wonder of the world. And to many, that wasn't just propaganda. This bold and ambitious project was the dream of Libya's former leader, Muammar Gaddafi. His vision, to turn Libya's arid desert into fertile land as green as the Libyan flag during his regime, a completely green banner representing the Libyan Jamahiriya. But how close did they come to realizing that dream? How was this river built beneath the desert? And what has become of it today? Let's dive into the story of a river without a drop of surface water, a mega-project born out of desperation, vision, and oil money. Let's begin with the geographic reality of Libya. It's a country located in North Africa, with its entire northern edge lining the Mediterranean Sea. But beyond that narrow coastal strip lies a vast and unforgiving landscape, the Sahara Desert. In fact, about 90% of Libya's land area is desert, and half of that is classified as sand desert, a literal sea of sand dunes and rock. Libya's biggest geographical disadvantage is its lack of freshwater resources. There are no permanent rivers or lakes to speak of. Instead, it has wadis, dry riverbeds that occasionally fill with water after rare rainstorms, only to evaporate quickly. These conditions make Libya one of the driest nations on Earth. Most of the country's rainfall is concentrated in a tiny sliver along the coast, which makes up less than 5% of Libya's total area. Even there, average annual rainfall is just around 4 inches. In the interior, rain is practically non-existent, falling in brief, heavy showers at the end of winter and early spring. That's it. Unsurprisingly, most of the population clusters in cities along the coast, where water is at least somewhat available. According to data from 2020, nearly 80% of Libyans lived in urban areas, roughly 5.4 million people out of a total population of 6.8 million. In rural regions, people survive in small pockets, mainly around oases, using traditional irrigation methods for farming. But water access remains a constant struggle. Water scarcity is a well-known crisis in the Middle East and North Africa. The reasons are many: scorching temperatures, high evaporation rates, limited rainfall, and a growing population. Libya is a textbook example. In fact, the World Resources Institute ranks Libya as the 6th most water-stressed country on the planet. Back in the 1960s, Libya began experimenting with desalination, removing salt from seawater to make it drinkable. But it was an expensive and limited effort. Then, in 1969, everything changed. Muammar Gaddafi seized power in a military coup, and soon, his administration began eyeing a much grander solution, the Great Man-Made River Project. Interestingly, Libya's water woes actually predate Gaddafi. During the 1930s, under Italian colonial rule, water shortages were already a major issue. But back then, Libya lacked the money, manpower, and technology to tackle such a challenge. That all changed in the 1950s, when oil exploration began in earnest. In 1953, while drilling for oil in southern Libya, foreign companies made an unexpected discovery. Not only did they strike large oil reserves, they also tapped into massive underground reservoirs of freshwater. It was like hitting the jackpot twice. Further studies revealed that this water came from the Nubian sandstone aquifer system, one of the largest fossil aquifers in the world. This ancient groundwater is believed to be between 10,000 and 1 million years old, formed back when the Sahara was a much greener, wetter region. Over millennia, this water became trapped deep underground beneath thick layers of sandstone. The aquifer stretches beneath 4 countries: Libya, Chad, Sudan, and Egypt, covering an astonishing 770,000 square miles. It's estimated to contain around 39 quadrillion gallons of water. That's an almost incomprehensible amount. At first, the Libyan government considered using this water for large-scale desert agriculture, but by the early 1980s, the strategy shifted. A new plan emerged. Instead of trying to farm in the desert, why not transport the water to the densely populated coast? It seemed far more feasible than investing in costly desalination plants that the country couldn't afford to operate or maintain. The coastal aquifers, especially around Tripoli, were also becoming increasingly salty and polluted due to overuse. Meanwhile, a giant reservoir of pristine freshwater lay untouched in the desert interior. The only problem? No one lived near it. The water had to be brought hundreds of miles across harsh, empty terrain. Thus, the Great Man-Made River Project was born. Despite its name, it's not a river at all, but an immense network of underground pipes, aqueducts, reservoirs, and pumping stations designed to move water from the heart of the desert to Libya's cities and farmlands along the Mediterranean coast. But building such a river was no small feat. Construction was divided into multiple phases. The idea was to drill deep wells, some over 1,600 feet into the ground, tap into the aquifer, and then transport the water through a massive system of pipes. By the time it's completed, the network is expected to span over 2,500 miles, with a capacity of more than 1.6 billion gallons per day. In 1984, Gaddafi officially launched the project and laid the foundation stone near the Sarir Aquifer in eastern Libya. The first phase of the project, known as GMR-1, was focused on two fields, Tazerbo and Sarir. Hundreds of deep wells were drilled, and the water was pumped through twin pipelines to Ojdabia, where it was stored in large reservoirs. From there, it was distributed to the coastal cities of Benghazi and Sirte. By 1991, Phase 1 was complete. It consisted of a 990-mile-long double pipeline capable of transporting 528 million gallons of water per day. To build it, engineers installed a staggering 250,000 sections of reinforced concrete pipe, each 13 feet wide and 23 feet long. These were the largest precast concrete pipes ever made at the time, manufactured at two giant plants inside Libya using steel-reinforced, pre-stressed concrete. The pipes were placed into 23-foot deep trenches using custom-designed cranes and bulldozers. Each joint was sealed with heavy-duty rubber gaskets and cement grout before being buried. The construction also included massive reservoirs. For instance, one reservoir near Ojdabia spans over 3,300 feet in diameter and holds more than 6 billion gallons of water, essentially a man-made lake. The numbers are jaw-dropping. Over 5 million tons of cement were used, enough to build 20 Great Pyramids of Giza. The amount of steel wire used in the pipe reinforcement could encircle the Earth 280 times. Just to appreciate the scale, consider this. Libya even built a monument out of one of these pipe segments to showcase the size of a single piece. Following the success of Phase 1, the second major section, GMR-2, was launched in western Libya. Its goal was to supply water to the capital, Tripoli. Phase 2 began delivering water in 1996, pulling from wells in the Jabal Assa area. Additional phases were planned to connect other regions of the country, with the long-term vision of supplying water for agriculture, domestic use, and eventually industry. Water from the Great Man-Made River was intended to revolutionize farming in Libya. In theory, it would irrigate thousands of acres of land, boost food security, and reduce reliance on imports. And for a time, it seemed to be working. But the project wasn't without criticism. Many scientists warned that fossil water is a non-renewable resource. Once it's used up, it's gone forever. The Nubian aquifer is not actively replenished, especially not in a region where rainfall is so rare. Some also questioned the environmental and geopolitical implications of extracting water shared by multiple countries. Then came the civil war. After Gaddafi's fall in 2011, Libya plunged into political chaos. Maintenance of the Great Man-Made River became difficult. Many of the pumping stations and pipelines were damaged during the conflict. In recent years, armed groups have even used water flow as a bargaining chip, cutting supply to cities like Tripoli for political leverage. What was once a national symbol of pride is now struggling to stay functional. Still, the Great Man-Made River remains a powerful example of human ingenuity, a testament to what's possible even in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Whether it will continue to provide water to future generations, however, depends on Libya's stability, resources, and commitment to managing this fragile legacy. So, did they manage to turn the desert green? For a moment in history, they came close, but the river, like the nation that built it, now stands at a crossroads. Here are 9 countries that border the Baltic Sea, but recently, global attention has focused on just 2 of them, Germany and Denmark. Why? Because nestled between these 2 nations is the site of one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in European history. If you sail through this area, you'll notice something unusual. Artificial land formations, newly carved out channels leading into the sea, and at times, as many as 70 ships scattered across the horizon. Not exactly your average maritime traffic. These vessels weren't there for sightseeing. They were part of a massive operation that involved digging up more than 76 million cubic feet of soil and rock from the seabed. So what's going on here? It's all part of the Fehmarnbelt Fixed Link, a 10 billion euros megaproject that's not just rewriting engineering records, but also transforming how Europe connects. Off the coasts of Germany and Denmark, two entirely new harbors have been constructed, each capable of handling nearly 100,000 tons of raw materials per week. An enormous production plant, covering roughly 11 million square feet, has also sprung up. All of this is to make way for a tunnel. But not just any tunnel. This project is building what will soon be the world's longest immersed combined road and rail tunnel, a direct connection between the German island of Fehmarn and Denmark's Lolland Island. Up until now, crossing between the two meant relying on a ferry, a process that involved queuing up, boarding, and sitting through a 45-minute ride across the strait. And that's on a good day. Storms, strong winds, or fog could easily delay service by hours. So the idea of a permanent, fixed link has been on the drawing board for decades, since at least the 1990s. Initially, the concept was to construct a 12-mile cable-stayed bridge with a 4-lane highway and 2 electrified railway tracks. The design was dramatic, featuring 4 giant pylons, each nearly 920 feet tall, and 3 central spans, each stretching 2,375 feet. If built, it would have set world records for the longest spans on a combined road-rail bridge. Construction was supposed to begin with the goal of opening in 2018. The Danish company Fehmarn AS was awarded the contract to develop the project. But then came a major pivot. In 2010, after extensive studies and engineering assessments, Fehmarn AOS concluded that a tunnel would be the better option. The reason? Fewer technical risks and a more predictable construction process. The seabed's geology, with its challenging mix of soft clay and hard limestone, made the bridge option far more complex and risky. Plus, the cost difference between the bridge and the tunnel was surprisingly small, 5.2 billion versus 5.5 billion euros. Construction time wasn't drastically different either, 5.9 years for the bridge versus 6.5 years for the tunnel. So the plan shifted. The tunnel became the official design. The tunnel, once complete, will stretch 11 miles, about 18 kilometers, and carry both road and rail traffic. It will consist of 2 double-lane motorways, 2 electrified railway tracks, and a service tunnel in the center. To support such a massive structure, construction had to start not just with digging, but with building the facilities required to produce and transport the enormous materials needed. That's where the gigantic manufacturing plant comes in. Built near the Danish town of Rødbyhavn on Lolland, this facility is the largest of its kind in the world. Inside, 6 production lines churn out the precast concrete elements that will form the tunnel. Each segment is a monster in its own right, 712 feet long, 131 feet wide, and 33 feet high. And they weigh a staggering 73,500 tons, just shy of a fully loaded cruise ship. In total, 79 of these standard tunnel segments will be needed. On top of that, special segments will be created to house technical equipment and emergency access systems. And since transporting these massive tunnel elements from distant locations would be logistically impossible and prohibitively expensive, the production plant was strategically built just a few miles from the actual tunnel site. Even the harbors were purpose-built to receive raw materials like gravel, sand, cement, and steel, capable of handling tens of thousands of tons weekly. The German side at Puttgarden also got its own smaller port to support the construction effort. By 2024, dredging operations were in full swing. Ships of every kind filled the Fehmarnbelt: cutter suction dredgers, trailing suction hopper dredgers, and specialized stone clearance vessels. Their mission was to dig an 11-mile trench between Fehmarn and Lolland. The trench measured up to 164 feet wide and almost 50 feet deep. The seabed's natural conditions were tough, ranging from soft clay to hard limestone, but the specialized fleet handled it all. Rather than dumping the excavated material, engineers decided to reuse it. The soil and rock were transported to a designated area off Rødbyhavn to create 741 acres of new land. This reclaimed land will eventually become a mix of natural habitat and recreational zones, complete with beaches, parks, and trails. With the trench now complete and reinforced with gravel, the next monumental step begins: laying down the tunnel sections. Entrances to the tunnel have already been constructed on both Lolland and Fehmarn. These massive portals serve as gateways for the submerged structure that will rest beneath the sea. Transporting and positioning each tunnel section is no small task. Each segment will be attached to floating pontoons, then guided into place by tugboats. This delicate process, known as immersion, won't be done remotely. It will be operated from a control room located on one of the pontoons. A team of 22 people will oversee the process, using high-precision underwater cameras and positioning systems to guide the section into the trench with an accuracy margin of just half an inch. Once each section is perfectly placed, large rubber gaskets, engineered to last 120 years, will be installed between them to ensure watertight seals. Then, layers of soil will be placed back over the entire tunnel, burying it beneath the seabed. In the end, this will be a tunnel that is both underwater and underground. But if installing just one tunnel segment takes up to 40 hours, how long will the whole project take to complete? That's the million-euro question. When plans were first floated in 2012, the goal was to open the tunnel by 2021. A few years later, the date was pushed to 2024, then 2028. Finally, in 2020, the official opening date was set for 2029. Many are eagerly awaiting that year because the benefits of this tunnel will be enormous. Travel time will be slashed dramatically. What is currently a 45-minute ferry ride will become a 10-minute drive through a modern tunnel. Even better, high-speed trains will cross the same route in just 7 minutes, reaching speeds of up to 124 miles per hour. Zoom out on the map, and the bigger picture becomes clear. The tunnel isn't just about connecting Fehmarn and Lolland. It's about reshaping transportation across Northern Europe. Once completed, it will create a direct link between Scandinavia and Central Europe. Freight trucks, passenger vehicles, and trains will be able to travel seamlessly from Copenhagen all the way to Hamburg, reducing congestion, cutting emissions, and boosting economic ties. It will also strengthen the Trans-European Transport Network, TEN-T, the EU's plan for integrating infrastructure across member states. In short, the Fehmarnbelt Tunnel is more than a regional project. It's a continental game-changer, and it's breaking records along the way. When finished, it will hold the title for the world's longest immersed tunnel, the longest combined road and rail tunnel, the longest underwater road tunnel, and the second deepest underwater concrete tunnel ever built. It's not just a feat of engineering, it's a symbol of ambition, collaboration, and the future of European connectivity. From blueprint to reality, the Fehmarnbelt Fixed Link is a marvel in motion. And as the countdown to 2029 continues, it's already shaping up to be one of the defining infrastructure projects of our era.